Welcome, class, and welcome to the Unit 1 Foundations of Government Review. So we're just going to go over some of the basic principles of government and what we have in America. So let's start our next slide. First off, we talk about the different purposes of government, and one of them is economic decisions. The government controls how money or taxes or how are they used. Okay. So for an example, the IRS or how they use taxes is an example of how they make economic decisions. And then Federal Reserve, like controlling the money supply, that's an economic decision. Things like sales taxes, and then how to use that money to fund the government, whether it's national, state, or local. Okay. Another function or purpose of the government is to maintain social order. So what the government does is it controls society by making sure everyone is safe and just. Okay, so there's things like courts that make sure everybody follows the law so things go in orderly fashion. Another thing that a purpose of government is to, an example would be of social order is the police and the courts, because they're going to enforce laws and decide if they're just or not. Okay. So another purpose of government is to provide public service, and that's the government. It makes sure citizens have what they need in order to go about society. And one of the example of that could be transport or transportation. So that could be trains, buses, and another thing is schools, because that's something we need to have in order to create a to give citizens what they really need to go about their daily lives. And then brings us to the last purpose is to provide national security. And this is where the government keeps the nation safe and keeps it safe from foreign attack. Okay. So for example, could be the military. An example of a branch of the military is the Army, Navy, Marines. But then we talk about the CIA, the NSA, talking about agencies that provide information on things that might be safe to the safety of America as a whole from foreign attack. And we've seen how they've done that in the past. And how do you remember this? There's an acronym, ESPN. We know about the entertainment sports network, public network, but we're talking about here. We're talking about economic decisions, social order, public service, and national security. Okay. So, what are different types of government? And this is what most governments used to be. Um, and one is to be an authoritarian type of government, and that's where the government has total and complete control over the people or the citizens. You see this guy yelling, he's making all the decisions, he has control over them, there's no voting. This could be called totalitarian or autocratic. That's just a different word for authoritarian in terms of a different form of government. And as we can see, those aren't really good forms of government. All right, we're going to see we're going to see. What are some other forms of authoritarian government across the world? Because there are other forms of authoritarian governments to this day. Okay, so an authoritarian government has absolute power, and they do not have a constitution. So their rights are not written down. So they're not subject to the laws that are written in the Constitution. And basically, that also means that people have few or no rights. meaning the government can do what they want to you. Now, the rule by force is usually how they do this, so it's usually, that's also another not a very good thing. Another problem is that often if they hold elections, they're not fair. Okay, so these authoritarian governments will say that this person wasn't elected, I had the most votes, and that's not good. So what we have as an examples of different authoritarian governments, one is a dictatorship. And that's only when one leader at all has the power to make decisions and control all the people. All right. And an example of that is Fidel Castro in Cuba. Okay. He had been a dictator for a very long time. He made all the decisions, he had all the power, and nobody else had to listen to him. Everybody else had to listen to him. So another type of authoritarian government is an oligarchy. Now that's when just a few people, maybe 2 to 4 people, maybe a little more, they run and they control the whole everything. And that's usually China is an oligarchy. Okay. And what we see in different ways is one is a monarchy. So it's a government that usually has a king or a queen, and the power is passed through the family. Okay. Saudi Arabia is an example of this. So when we talk about a democracy, this is a type of government where the people have the power. And that's important because, and they also have rights that are protected by a constitution, something that's written down. Okay. So the people are the ones that put the people in power in power. The citizens and government follow the written laws. Okay. So they both have to listen to the laws. And elections are fair. So it's not like one person is gonna win the election always. It's whoever votes the most gets that position. So when we talk about a type of democracy in which citizens vote directly, we're talking about something called a direct democracy. That's without the use of representatives. So an example of that would be of ancient Greece, where everybody that was a citizen was able to vote directly on laws. A referendum is another type of initiative where you vote on a law to be passed or not, and it goes over the representatives. And when that happens, representative democracy is a type of democracy which elected officials are chosen to represent citizens' interests in a certain area. So, for example, Maryland has their own politicians that we represent, and they get sent to the government and they make it laws as an entire country. Okay, and the reason they do this is because it would take a very long time if things were directly voted for by people. Okay. Um, so a parliamentary democracy is a type of representative democracy in which decisions are made by a law-making group called parliament. So they're like our Congress, but they are led by a prime minister. And the difference is that the parliament, legislative body, is the person that they vote for who the prime minister is. So they don't directly vote on this prime minister. And an example of this is the United Kingdom. And then when we have something called a presidential democracy, there's an separate executive branch that's voted directly, and we have a president. Okay, and United States is an example of that presidential democracy we have. So we talk about the economic systems, right? And one is traditional, command, free market, and then if we combine them all together, it's a mixed economic system. So a producer are the people that provide goods and services, whereas the consumer are the people that buy or consume the goods and services. So when we talk about producers, they're the one making the products or providing the service. Consumers are the ones that are buying those or those services. So what we can analyze different and by answering 3 questions about what to produce. So what is made, how to produce, how to make it, and for whom to produce, or who is buying it for, who's buying it for. Okay, so those are the 3 key questions. Okay, we always ask, because if there's a disruption in any of these questions and it's not being met, then we see problems with our economy. So there are 3 main types of economic systems. The traditional is where people are usually amongst themselves, and there's not really a currency. They tend to trade or barter. So if you cut my grass, then I will provide you with some tomatoes. It's a trade or a barter system. A command economy is where the government has complete control of the economy. All right, and then the market is when producers and consumers set prices. So in a traditional economy, an example would be a village or tribe. In a command would be Russia or the old Russia, or USSR. And a free market is United States. Now, the United States isn't exactly, there's no real true free market country because the government needs money to produce things. Government has their say, but the United States is generally more of a free market than any other economic system. But then usually most, if not all countries, do have what's called a mixed economy, where there's either a combination of 2 or 3 economic systems. In the United States, as an example, the European Union is also another example where there's both of those things underlying. It depends on how much you want to make it a command economy. European Union has more of a command economy, more government intervention, and the United States has more of a free market. And then when we talk about traditional, that still is in our economy. For example, we buy turkeys on Thanksgiving. We buy Christmas trees on Christmas and presents. So all that stuff is part of a traditional economy that all countries have too. When we talk about the Constitution, what is the Constitution? First off, it's a set of rules and laws that explain what the government can and can't do. It also explains how it can operate. How do we elect a president? What does a president do? What does Congress do? And then we have this preamble, and it's the introduction, and it lists its goals, roles, and responsibilities. And what does that mean? All right, first, to establish justice, make sure our society is just and fair and just. Ensure domestic tranquility, and that's to promote peace and order. Provide for the common defense, that's to protect life, foreign and domestic, from foreign and domestic powers. To use the promote general welfare. So to promote and make sure that the government is helping people and the economy and all sorts of things that make our life better. Secure the blessing of liberty. That's to protect the rights of its citizens. So the government is always going to make sure these rights are protected. So the articles of the Constitution, they describe different powers of the government. Article 1 explains the powers of the legislative branch. 2 is the executive or president. 3 is the judicial. Article 4 are powers of the states. Article 5 is amending or changing the Constitution. Article 6, the Constitution is supreme, meaning its laws take place over the state laws. And Article 7 is making the Constitution ratified. How do we make sure it's ratified when it's adopted? And what is an amendment and how many are there? So there are 27 amendments. Okay. And the first 10 are the Bill of Rights, and the rest are 11 through 27. So let's overview the three branches of government. First, we have the legislative branch, and what that does, it writes the laws. It's also called the Congress, and there's two parts of the Congress: the House of Representatives, based on population, and the Senate, which every state gets 2 senators. So the executive branch enforces the laws. And who is in the executive branch? The president, vice president, and his cabinet. So remember, these guys are about enforcing laws that are already existent. They're not writing laws, they're not making laws. They're just making sure that those laws are followed out. And the president has their job for 4 years. So, what about our last branch, the judicial branch? That is the job that interprets the laws. And it is made up of courts. The highest court is the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decides if a law is constitutional or unconstitutional. Okay? So if it's not following the Constitution, that law, then it could say it's unconstitutional. The law can't do that. Okay? So what are some principles and values of our democracy? Well, one is popular sovereignty. And that means that the people have the power. Okay? Not the government. The people that are in society and that vote, they're the ones that have the power. That's where the power derives from. Then we have a system called federalism, where power is divided and shared between state and national governments or federal government. So the rule of law is that public officials, that means anybody that works in the government, follow the same constitutional laws or principles as the people. So the rule of law means even the president has to follow the law. That people have to follow the laws just as much as everybody else does. No one's above it. It's part of our principle and value in democracy. So what's another thing that we have is we have a separation of powers. And that creates a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. And they all have a set of powers that are different that each of those can do. So, for example, the president enforces, okay, and the legislative rights laws we talked about, that's the and judicial interprets, that's their separate powers. Now, associated and attached with that is that each branch of government has the power to check each other to make sure no branch gets too much power. Okay, so an example of that would be that the president can't, if Congress passes a law, the president can veto it or say no. All right, or the judicial branch could say that that law might be unconstitutional. So those are two checks on legislative power. An executive branch can be impeached by the legislative body, or it can be told its unconstitutional actions unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So those are checks to make sure that no one gets too powerful. And then we talk about appointments. All of those are extremely important to keep a check on each other. Judicial review is where the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, can declare laws unconstitutional. And what that means is if they declare it unconstitutional, that means it goes against the laws of America. And whatever the majority of the people vote, 50% or more, then the minority group, all right, the majority, then 50% or more is what occurs. So the voting in Congress is an example of more than 50% vote, then a law gets passed because most people agree and that's what should happen. Now, still, you need to protect the rights and interests of a minority of people. So you can't just say, we're going to do something that harms the minority just because the majority wants to do it. That is also not part of our Constitution or our principle in democracy. So, individual rights and freedoms. Individual rights are protected by the Constitution and Bill of Rights. So, individual rights and freedoms are protected mainly in the Bill of Rights. And those are the biggest rights we are given under the Constitution. Okay. And that means that it doesn't matter who votes for this to happen or decides something bad's going to happen to these people or minority or even the majority, that we all have rights that are protected. All right. And then we have equal protection. The government must treat all people the same and equal. Nobody can be administered one judgment and the other could be against the law, and somebody else does the same thing and it's not against the law. That's not allowed. The government has to treat all people equally. Another principle of democracy is that there are limits on government power. So a government can't do whatever they want, like a dictatorship. They have to follow. There are limits, there are constraints, there are ways to say, hey, you cannot do that. There's a limit on how much power you have. And then when we talk about consent of the governed, people give their consent or approval to take place in the government. So it's the people that put people in power. And the only reason the people are in power is because the people say it's okay for them to do that. Okay, that's another one. It's important in our democracy. So when we go on to the Bill of Rights, what are some of the important the rights and most would argue the first 10 are very important, the First Amendment, 10 amendments, where we talk about the first one is the freedom of speech, right? And that encompasses 5 main broad categories. All right, so first one is you are allowed to speak in any forum. Another thing is you're allowed to protest. So whatever you're going against, you can argue and protest. Okay, you can say what you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. You can protest and complain if it doesn't hurt anybody. You can assemble, meaning people can gather in your home or in public places and get together and talk about what they want to change. Religion is another one. All right, your freedom to worship or to pray or to do to whatever God or no God you want, that cannot be infringed on the First Amendment. And then petition is one. So the ability to go around and collect signatures for a cause. Okay. All of those are what we call freedom of speech or the First Amendment rights. Just because you say something that somebody might not like, as long as that doesn't hurt anybody, it's allowed. We go into the other amendments. The second one is the right to bear arms, which we also say guns, okay, and weapons. Okay, so the government cannot take away your guns if you want to have them, and that was usually made to make sure the government get too powerful, or so that's why the Second Amendment is very rooted in United States history and is very controversial. And the Third Amendment is no quartering, staying in house for the army or police. So the police or the army can't come into your house and say, all right, this is mine for this. I'm going to hang out. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to have a party. I'm going to get the army to stay here or the police to stay here for headquarters. And no, they can't do that. The fourth is protection from unlawful search and seizure, which means searching, meaning police cannot just go into a home without your permission, and they can't seize things or take things without your permission either. You would need something called a warrant or probable cause. Probable cause would mean there has to be a reason they're coming into your house. Maybe if you had drugs inside your house, but they had to have a reason or some sort of reason why they think that on evidence. And another thing is a warrant. So you have to get somebody, the judge, to sign off on something called a warrant, meaning they have a right to go in there and search your house. All right. The Fifth Amendment is you cannot be forced to testify for yourself or against yourself, more likely, meaning you don't have to say anything. And just by you not saying anything, by being silent, doesn't mean that you're guilty. You have that right. Okay? You cannot be tried twice for the same crime. So if you're declared innocent, then you can't go back and have them try you again for that crime. Due process is the right to trial. Okay, the right to have your rights. All right, nobody can take those away. And the eminent domain is government can only take your land if they make it for public use. So other people can use it. All people can for government purposes, right? Roads that everybody uses, or they can't just say, oh, I'm taking this and I'm selling it to somebody else. That's against the Fifth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment is a fair and speedy trial. Okay, so a lot of people sometimes were put in jail awaiting trial, and they just waited there forever. So they have the right also for it to be fair. So the jury and the judge need to be fair under the rule of law to you. And then we talk about the Seventh Amendment, and the Seventh Amendment is a right to a jury trial. Okay, and that means you have citizens of your peer that get to listen to that evidence and declare you guilty or not guilty, make that verdict. So another thing is Eighth Amendment is no cruel or unusual punishments. So, for example, locking you in a closed space, like this would be a cruel punishment that the government can't do. Also, things such as brutalities or beatings or torture, all those things are not allowed by the Eighth Amendment. So, the Ninth Amendment basically says there are more rights that are not in the Constitution. So it doesn't just say the government can do this to you and that it doesn't matter because it's not in the Constitution. That's not true. There's more rights than are just in the Constitution. The 10th Amendment is then, therefore, it's called the Reserve Clause, is that all powers not held by the federal government or national government will be held by the states. So a lot of things are held by the states. And so marriage laws and drug laws and all those things are not expressed by the government, but the states have those powers to do those things and make rules in those type of cases. So when we discuss our dissent and protest, okay, we discuss many things, all right, like to disagree with a political or government action, right? That's dissent. Is just the sheer disagreement. And just so I can mention, if you already have this page completed, you don't have to do it again. I'm just keeping this up as a general review guide for the class. You don't feel like you need it, you can just put this on your last page. Anyways, I'm still just going to go over our discussion on dissent and protest. So a protest is a statement or action to express dissent. So when you actually act on that dissent, that's when we were going to say it's a protest. If it is legal, it's allowed by the law. Okay, so you can protest if you want. There are many legal ways to do it. And then there are legal ways, like down here, an action that breaks the law, and that's anything that causes violence or safety or disorder. All those things are not good, all right? Even if you're angry and you want to protest, it's breaking the law, it's not allowed, okay? So in American history, the legal protest has made more of a change, okay? Orderly and demonstrations have. So there are things you can do to protest. One is petition, and that's the request to change for people to sign to show agreement or disagreement with a certain issue, right? You can just get a bunch of people to sign and say we don't like this, put your signature, so it shows power that these group of people do not agree or disagree or don't disagree with your law or your action. You can boycott as protest, and that is to buy refusal to use or buy from an organization. So if you don't like Starbucks and the way they treat their employees, you don't buy it. Okay, and that's going to hurt their sales and hopefully allow them to make better decisions that are in your favor. One way is by voting, and that is by you officially vote for your choice or elected official, and this is a very powerful form of protest If you don't like what somebody's doing, do not vote for them in that next election. Vote for somebody new. You have a choice. Another type of protest is what we would say is a referendum. And voters use this to either reject or adopt a new law. So, for example, one was about cannabis, whether it was allowed, yes or no, and for the state referendum, and most people said yes, cannabis was allowed. So it got adopted as a law. Okay, it's where you have a direct vote on a certain issue. So another thing you can do is you can file a lawsuit. So you can sue an agency or the employees, and a judge or jury will make a decision. Usually it's the employer, and that way you can either get money in terms of retribution or make it harder for them to do things you don't like in the future, because it will cost them money. Another way is to picket, and that's to stand outside of an establishment, typically with pickets or signs. And these people are talking about writing right to vote, and they stayed outside of Congress, they stayed outside of the White House, and a lot of people saw that, and it got their support. So picketing is another type of protest. That's legal. And if these things are legal and they're approved, then they're legal protests and they're allowed. So another way you can do that by protest is to communicate or make your concern or disagreement to the media or the news, so they can make the public aware of the issue. So a lot of people go on and they write to the media, they email the media, they go on social media, right? Facebook or Instagram, and they make their arguments, and people in the public can weigh them and listen to them and think about them themselves. So communicating with media through the media is another way to protest. Another way is to talk to your contact your public official directly. So this person's writing an email or expressing your disagreement or writing a letter to government officials. Okay, so just saying, I don't like this law you passed. I do like this law. We should have this law. Contacting them directly. Phone calls, voicemails, emails, letters. All of those ways to direct contact them and tell them your agreement or disagreement. And then this is the only one of the types of protests that are illegal. All right, and either a riot or some sort of violence. And what that is that is a disturbance of peace. And as you can see, the guys are police and the citizens are fighting each other, and they're throwing all sorts of things, and that's not safe. It's definitely illegal, meaning it's not allowed by law. It's not good. And society has shown that through legal methods, most chains have been moved where people were not hurt. People kept peace. All right, they see the support that is not through violence, and that's what makes them want to change. Not say that other person's wrong because they're using violence. Okay, so this is the end. If you have any questions, let me know. If you want to watch this again, if needed, then that's fine too. I wish you luck on the test and have a good day.